Real estate investment, promissory notes provision. Get ready because it's time to raise the stakes with real estate. Now we're going to take a look at the components of a promissory note. When we're dealing with real estate, usually we will have a note or loan related to it. So we want to look at the components of the notes and the loans at this time. In future presentations, we'll zoom in on certain components of the loans, including doing calculations such as the calculation of the payments, the change on the calculation of the payment that could take place with different interest rates, and the creation of amortization tables and all that kind of good stuff. Here, we want to look at the major components. We will be dealing with some more definitions here. When thinking about definitions, we're going to reference Investopedia, which is a place you can go if you have investment-related terms for more detail about investment-related terms. So we have the promissory notes provisions. A promissory note has a lot of components and pieces to it. So some of these components and pieces, of course, are going to be used for the calculations of things like payments, and some of them are going to be having to do with what's going to happen with regards to the promissory note given certain conditions or future activities that happen in the future. So obviously we have the amount borrowed. Typically when dealing with a real estate transaction, you're going to have to put some amount down. We might then borrow the rest of it, using the rest of it to complete the purchasing process. That then the amount that is going to be needed, the purchasing power of that to purchase the home or whatever real estate we are purchasing. We have the rate of interest. Obviously, the rate of interest is in essence going to be the cost of us using the purchasing power in order to purchase whatever real estate that we are purchasing. You can think of interest as similar to rent, meaning if you were to rent something like an apartment or something like that, you are paying for the use of the apartment. When you're looking at a loan, they're giving you something, they're giving you purchasing power that you don't currently have, and you're going to be giving it back in the future. That's basically a similar kind of process. You're paying for the rent of the purchasing power, which is in essence the interest that will be paid, dollar amount, and the due dates and the number of payments. These are going to be components, and these will generally be components that are going to be necessary for us to kind of calculate what the actual loan payments will be and so on and so forth. So we'll deal with them more in future presentations when we start to break down the loan calculation. So obviously we need the dollar amounts, the due dates, and the number of payments that are going to be involved, the maturity date, so how far out in the future will it mature, the reference to the security for the loan. So note again, these top items up here, the amount borrowed, the interest rate, the dollar amount, due dates, and the number of payments and the maturity date. These are the general components we'll put together when we do the calculations of the payments and so on, how much interest is going to be paid per year in this amortization table. Then we have, of course, items that aren't really related to those calculation numbers, but are crucial to the loan itself, of course, and that's a reference to the security on the loan. So security is something that's going to support the loan, and that usually, of course, will give the lender more security about the loan being repaid. The security for real estate will typically be the real estate that is going to be purchased, and therefore they have recourse in the event that the loan is not going to be repaid. That's usually beneficial to the institution to lower the risk, and that's usually beneficial to the borrower to lower the risk, because then there might get a better terms, better interest rates for it. So default, we'll talk maybe a little bit more about that in a future slide here, but what are going to be happening if there's a default on the loan, say payments aren't being made or something like that. So security for the loan. So remember, when you're dealing with a loan that is for real estate, then generally you're talking about a larger dollar amount. The institution is going to want more security, lowering the risk on their side in order to be able to offer the best terms for the borrower, and that usually will result in the security of the real estate itself. So security in general will be a security interest on a loan is a legal claim on collateral that the borrower provides that allows the lender to repossess the collateral and sell it if the loan goes bad. So clearly, the real estate is a really good thing in terms of the bank's perspective to have as collateral generally, because usually the real estate value is fairly stable and or increases in normal times. And even if it goes down, if there's a substantial down payment, then they should be okay in the event that there's a problem. And, you know, what would happen is they could basically, if their payments didn't happen and they repossess the home, they can generally sell the home and then recover the loan balance that were secured. So that would be the idea. Obviously, that would lower the risk for the bank or the institution giving the loan, which would allow them to offer better deals for the loan, lower rates, and so on. So a security interest lowers the risk to the lender, allowing it to charge lower interest rates on the loan. Lower interest means that the borrower's cost of capital will also be reduced. So it can be a good thing for both sides. Default. So the term default happens when a borrower is unable to make timely payments, misses payments, or avoids or stops making payments on interest or principal owed. So clearly, if you're the lender, that's what you don't want to have happen, because you're making your money by giving the loan, by getting the money back. Just like if you were renting out an apartment or something, you want the apartment back at the end, plus you want the rent on it, which of course is basically the interest. So defaults can happen on secured debt like a mortgage loan secured by a house, or unsecured debt like credit cards or student loan. So a default just can be in general if you took out a loan, no matter what type of loan, different types of loan, whether it be secured or not. If it was not secured, then the lender doesn't have as much recourse. They have less, capacity to collect on it. If it was secured, then they have that recourse, of course. Defaults can have consequences like lowering credit scores, reduces the chance of obtaining credit in the future, and raising interest rate on existing debt, as well as any new obligations. So in the event that there was a default, then that even if you might say, well, then I can lose the property, but obviously there could be other consequences beyond that as well, including the credit score going down, making it more difficult to get financing in the future, and so on. So promissory note provisions continued. Penalties for late payments and forbearance provisions. So what kind of penalties would be involved for future kind of events that are violations of the loan terms? Provision for unscheduled or early payments. Now, this is something that's often you want to make sure that you have an idea of with the loan amount here, because notice you're usually looking at longer term loans. If you take a 30-year loan out, then the question is, you're paying interest on 30 years. From the bank's perspective, there's kind of a double-edged sword, right? If they get paid back sooner, they would like that to some degree, because they would be paid, because that would be less risky. But on the other hand, they're also losing interest. The longer the loan is out, then the more they're going to earn over the loan term in terms of interest. So what we would like to do as the person who is taking out the loan is have the capacity to pay off the loan earlier if we would like. So in other words, if we can have the security of having a 30-year loan, even though we plan on paying off the loan in 15 years, then that could give us some more leeway to, in the event that we have problems, pay off the lower amount of the loan, because it's a 30-year loan, which would lower the payments, but also be able to pay the loan off early if we choose to do so, if we can do so, which would lower the interest over the full term of the loan, because we'd be paying off sooner. It'd be like renting the apartment for a lesser period of time, and therefore we'd be paying less rent on it, which in this case would be interest in that case. So you want to make sure that you have the capacity typically to pay off the loan earlier if you can. Usually that would be beneficial to have that flexibility as the borrower. Notification of default and acceleration clause, non-recourse clause. In the event there is a non-recourse clause, loans are generally with recourse if the bad boy provisions are violated. This could include fraud or misrepresentation. Another example would be if the borrower willfully damages the asset, the borrower will generally be held personally responsible for the damage. So in other words, clearly, if you were to leave the home, if someone was to say, we're going to default on the home or something like that, and then the person destroys the property that they're leaving out of anger and so on, then are they responsible for the reduction in the value of the property that they cause on the way out, in essence? So the promissory note provisions continued. Loan assumability we'll talk about in a little bit future here, and future advances we'll talk a little bit more about here. So loan assumability, assumable mortgage, an arrangement where an outstanding mortgage and its terms can be transferred from the current owner to a buyer. When interest rates rise, an assumable mortgage is attractive to a buyer who can take on an existing loan with a lower rate. So if they can basically assume the loan and you have higher rates, and basically the current loan was created with a lower rate, then that could be attractive to a buyer. USDA, FHA, and VA loans are assumable when certain conditions are met. And then we have future advances, a clause in a mortgage that provides for additional availability of funds under the loan contract, meaning you could basically take more money out in the future, possibly, if you had a clause of future advances possibly in the loan. If a future advance clause is included in a loan contract, then the borrower can rely on obtaining funds from the lender under the terms of the contract without being required to obtain another loan for additional funds. Future advance clauses may or may not have certain contingencies that make the borrower eligible for future advances.